Come ride with me. It's time to saddle up right away. There's so much to see. Don't worry, I know the trails, I know the way.
This is Daniel Dauphin again with Dauphin Horsemanship, and we're here today to talk about transition bits. First of all, what is the most important part of any bit, bridle, hackamore combination? It's the hands on the reins. We said that in the Snaffle bit video. It's just as true with transition bits. So always keep that in mind, folks. Those words severe and mild and whatnot, they really only pertain to the hands on the reins. Bits only have the potential to be severe. No bit is by itself severe. To my mind, a transition bit is a bit that has three specific characteristics. One, it has low leverage shanks or cheeks. Those cheeks are loose. It's not a fixed bit, and it has a mild mouth. Those three things make up what I consider to be a transition bit. And this is a bit that we're talking about using as a transition from a snaffle up to a finished horse bridle. The general timeline for that, for me at least, I'm going to ride a colt, and doesn't have to be a 2-year-old. Like we're these days, I find myself starting more older horses. I've got several 3-year-olds in that are just to get started, but in general terms of training, we're going to ride that horse 8 months to a year in a snaffle, and in that period of time, I'm generally going to have all of the good that I can get from a snaffle out of the horse. We'll then go through what I'm calling transition bits. That period of time generally is about 3 to 6 months, and then the horse will be ready to move into a fixed bit, a full-on bridle bit, and there's still going to be some education that'll take place after that. One of the things that I do want to make clear today is that just because you're at a certain stage of bits does not mean that you cannot change from that stage. So I do like, when I start the transition phase with a horse, I like to ride them at least a month solid with these bits. I'll get into why later. But there would be nothing wrong once I have finished that, the horse is comfortable with the transition bit. There's nothing wrong at that point in going back to a snaffle. There are a lot of trainers that will, in the rides between shows, they'll go back to a snaffle, take some of the pressure off of their older horse, and then they'll put them back into a bridle, right before a show to get them tuned up. So don't feel like because you've moved the horse up in a bit that you can't go back down. So why do we want to go up in bit in the first place? There are several reasons. Probably the main of which is that if you want to show in Western disciplines, a lot of the various associations, breed associations and whatnot, are going to move a horse to an aged category at around 6. And at that point, a lot of them require in Western events that you're going to have to ride in a shank bit with one hand. So if you want to show your horse in Western events in a lot of associations, it's just plain a requirement. But there are some other reasons, and the real practical reasons of why I tend to want to move a horse up. We get maturity out of these bits. With the cutting horse futurity colts that I've had, usually we're right now at the beginning of March. This is about the time that the coming 3-year-olds start to get moved up, and it's amazing after you've ridden them a couple of months in these shank bits how much those horses mature in that period. It's quite a change that comes over them once you move them up to these bits. Things get a little more serious. It's kind of like putting in your big boy pants on. Another thing that we're going to get from these bits is increased sensitivity. The leverage is frequently misunderstood. We do not want a 3-to-1 ratio so that we can pull 10 pounds on the reins and put a 30-pound crush on their jaw. We want it so that we can pull back a few ounces on the reins and they feel a few ounces more so that it's noticeable in their mouth. It's really a telescopic effect. It's a magnification, an amplification. But it's not meant at all to cause the horse pain or discomfort or at least not generally. I mean, if I have one that really wants to be a knothead, well, I can bite him pretty good with one of these bits if I need to, but that's certainly not the general premise that I'm wanting to ride under. Which brings me to another sensitive topic, which is we tend to call these leverage bits. There are people out there that would have another category for some leverage bits, like the spade bits and whatnot. They would tend to call those signal bits. I kind of think that's semantics. Any bit is transmitting a signal. So, you know, I would say snaffle bits are signal bits, transition bits are signal bits, bits Texas style bits with tongue relief are signal bits. Spade bits are signal bits. Spade bits would give more signal. They have all of these, well, we'll get into that in the finished bit category more, but they have highly amplified signals on all of those things, but they could still be used as a leverage bit as well. So that's just a semantics issue as far as I'm concerned. The parts of a leverage bit. This entire piece from ring to ring is called the cheek. The lower portion from the mouthpiece down is the shank. The upper portion from the mouthpiece up is the purchase. It is the ratio of the shank to the purchase that determines the leverage. It is not the length of the cheek. I think that's something that gets misunderstood quite a bit. You could have a 6-inch cheek that has the mouthpiece put way up high right under this ring, and it could have a 5-to-1 leverage ratio because it's got 5 times more shank than purchase. Whereas if this bit were dropped down more to the middle, you could have the same 6-inch cheek but a 1-to-1 leverage ratio, or essentially no leverage. So it truly is where the mouthpiece is positioned with regard to the top and bottom of the rings that determines the leverage of the bit. Also, these are the rings of the bit. Now this is more of a finished horse bit, but I'm going to use it just to show how this is to be measured. The shank here really plays no part, or the shape of it plays no part in how much leverage the bit has. So this is a grazing bit which has a very swept back shank. It could be an S shank, like a cavalry style shank. It could be a 7 shank. There's lots of different designs that can take place in here. All that matters is the distance from the top of this ring to the mouthpiece and the mouthpiece to this ring. What direction you go does not have any influence on that. So you wouldn't measure the total shank, whether it's zigzagged or whatever. You're simply going from point A to point B, straight line. So that's something that I think confuses people quite a bit. One other thing, the rings of the cheek, this bit would appear to have 3 rings. Well, this is what's considered an Argentine style cheek, which is my favorite. This ring here exists for 2 reasons. One, I could ride this in a 2-rein, so I can attach a rein right here and work this just like I would a regular snaffle. It in effect at that point becomes a D-ring snaffle, or really gets more like a full cheek. And I can have another rein here with a twist of my hand. I can bring leverage into effect. This ring also, and the reason I really like it, serves to give a little bit of play to that mouthpiece. Like we talked in the last video about a horse having a happy mouth, that simply allows that horse to get comfortable to swallow, move that bit around with their tongue a little bit, and they're not having to lift the entire bit to do that. So I really like having just a little bit of play there. It makes quite a bit of difference with how comfortable the horse is. Now we also have the mouthpiece, just like we would with any snaffle, and they're quite a variation of mouthpieces. I'll show you a few more here in a minute, but this is just a plain snaffle. This would probably tend to be the type of first transition bit I would put a horse in, because it's going to be as familiar to him as the snaffle was initially. These would be considered the bars of the mouthpiece. With some bits you can get into rollers on the bars. Correction mount. So this would be a transition bit, one of the later transition bits I would ride in, that would actually introduce a port to the horse also. So the thing that I really want to make clear about these bits, just because we have added a low leverage shank does not mean that we don't have the possibility of really scaring a horse when we move up to this bit. As we talked about with snaffle bits, there are 7 pressure points on the horse that we use to communicate. We have the tongue, the corners of the mouth, and the bars. The snaffles, all of them use those 3 pressure points. When we move up to a leverage bit, any leverage bit, we are also adding the chin and the pole. With finishing bits and larger ports, we also have the ability to begin to touch the palate, but that's not true with transition bits. So I want to be really careful about how I go to introducing these bits to my horse, lest that added chin and pole pressure scare them. It's really can freak some horses out when you go grab them with these bits, and I'll tell you why. As we talked about the leverage in a second, this is a fairly low leverage bit, but the higher leverage bits actually have a slower action. I'll show you a diagram in just a second to explain that. But a lower leverage bit is a much quicker action. For that reason, when I transition from a snaffle to a transition bit, I have to very consciously slow my hands down. Whereas, you know, a horse has been ridden a year in a snaffle, I can pretty well do that and they're coming right with me. I wouldn't dream of doing that with this bit for a good while until they're very comfortable with it. I'm going to be more at this sort of speed and really letting them find it. One of the other major things that I do when I'm beginning with transition bits, the adjustment on the chin strap, I leave it quite loose. And for the same reason, as I'm picking up on here, this top ring is going to come down pretty quickly. I just move that a few inches and you can see how much change this top ring has made. That's what's causing the curb chain to come tight. So I don't want to really quickly grab down on his jaw, because that's a good recipe for that sort of reaction from your horse, and you only get one chance to make a first impression. I've drawn a little diagram here to demonstrate what I'm talking about when I say that a short shank bit or lower leverage bit has a faster action than a greater leverage bit. These circles are going to represent the arcs that a bit would take. The center point would be the mouthpiece, this lower portion representing the shank, and the top portion representing the port or the purchase of the bit, either of which is going to rotate as you're pulling on the shank. For this one, I've got this representing an 8-inch cheek bit, which wouldn't be at all uncommon. It's got a 6-inch shank, a 2-inch purchase. Please forgive my artistic abilities. My 7-year-old son and I are right about the same level of artistic ability. The very best that I do art-wise is after a long day I can draw flies pretty well, but that's really about it. At any rate, with this bit, we have, let's say the shank was just ahead of the vertical. We pulled back on the reins 5 inches, and you can see how much action we caused in the horse's mouth. This is how much we brought the rings forward, or how much we tilted the port up toward the roof of the mouth. Alright, that's with the high ratio bit. 2-inch to 6-inch, that's a 1-to-3 leverage ratio. Alright, now here's one of my transition bits. This is a 2-inch purchase and a 3-inch shank. So a 5-inch cheek, which again is pretty typical of the bits that I've been showing you today. So on this one, the same thing. We pulled 5 inches on the circumference of that arc, with the mouthpiece of the bit being at the center. And now you can see how much we rotated the purchase forward, or the port of the bit up. Okay, so for the same amount of pull, this bit, this short shank transition bit, far more action in the horse's mouth. As a matter of fact, one of my very favorite finishing bits is what's called a Cathy Dawn, and that is it's a fixed bit, but it has a fairly short shank, maybe just a little bit more than this, and about a 2-inch port on it. And I really find I can get a horse right here with that bit because it has so much movement and feel in their mouth. I have to do very little with my hand to get a good reaction. I don't want to say too much about this until we get into finishing bits, but there are trainers who tend to get along much better with the higher leverage bits, and some of them are very well known, very famous. I see all of Bob Avila's bits that he puts out tend to be long shank, high leverage type bits. I'm just of a different style, I suppose. I really tend to get along better with the shorter shank bits. I do like a good bit of port though, but this is a pretty good representation of the type of action that your horse would be experiencing for the same amount of pull on the rein. And then this would be a 1 to 1.5 leverage ratio. Typical transition bit, a 2 to 3, or broken down 1 to 1.5. All right, that's why, mathematically speaking, shorter shank bits have quicker action. Thank you. The higher leverage bits, they tend to have less signal because of the slower action. So they sort of have a lesser signal but more penalty for not reacting to the signal, which is why they only belong on a very finished horse. I really see lots and lots and lots of horses that are carrying way too much bit in their mouth. I'm not exactly sure why that occurs, but there's really not many horses that are broke enough to be carrying one of these, and yet they'll frequently be wearing much greater, much larger bit in their mouth. We spoke just a second ago about this Argentine Shank. This middle loop can be used for the 2-rein, and as I said, I like the play that it offers. However, with regard to the curb chain, I will sometimes see people that have a curb chain attached here. That's not proper. You want the curb chain attached to the top ring, generally the same ring that the head stall attaches to. And the reason for that, as I'm pulling back on this rein, or on the bottom ring here, you can see that top ring moves forward. Well, that has the effect of pulling the head stall down, and it's also taking up the slack of the curb chain and pulling it forward up to the jaw. So that is the way that these bits are intended to work. If you were to put the curb chain on this bit, as it rotates, nothing changes. So your curb chain will essentially never come tight. And I don't really want to be hiding pressure points from my horse. I want to be properly preparing them for them. I want to show them how to respond to that pressure properly. I don't want to omit signals. So curb chain needs to be up top. Some of these bits will have a little piece that looks almost like a trigger, which is meant to hold the curb chain. Others, like this bit, actually have a separate slot that's actually meant to hold the curb. Either way works perfectly fine. Just a personal preference thing. We'll talk just a little bit about the English side of this. I don't have any of the English bits that would fit this criteria, but those would be Kimberwicks, Pelhams, and there may well be another or multiple other forms of English leverage bits that I'm unaware of. I'll say this, those bits are frequently set up similar to this one. They're to be ridden in a 2-rein or can be ridden in a 2-rein. One of the major differences, though, English people tend to regard those bits as highly severe, which I don't think that I would agree with. Again, bits only have the potential to be severe. The main difference there, because bits and mechanics and horsemanship, all of those things are universal. We all ride horses. Doesn't matter whether you ride English, Western, whatever. However, our styles and our goals vary quite a bit. English people are going to tend to ride with a lot more contact. And when you ride with leverage, even low leverage, and contact, that can really have a numbing effect on a horse. Just as we talked about in the Snaffle video, if your bridle is adjusted too tight and the rings are constantly forcing the horse to smile. You've got that wrinkle or two in the corners. That's pressure that the horse has to learn to ignore in order to perform. You've essentially put him in that situation. If you're riding with a leverage bit and contact, you constantly have a bind on the horse that he has to learn to ignore. That means he's in the correct place, yet there is still pressure on him, and he only has a choice of more pressure or accepting lesser pressure and tolerating it. So leverage with contact truly is an entirely different game. That's why what we would consider very mild bits, they consider to be fairly severe. It's not that there's any difference in the bit, it's all in the use of it. And again, no right or wrong there. It's just it's how you're going about using the mechanics. As we said a moment ago, when I do first put these bits on a horse, I like to go with a mouthpiece that's very similar to what the horse has been carrying in a snaffle. So this is a plain broken bit. I use that type quite a bit. I also like to make sure that my curb is fairly loose. I want to pull that ring back 4 or 5 inches before my curb is making contact. So it wouldn't be uncommon at all with a standard Western curb. You might put a few fingers underneath the chain under the horse's chin. I can just about turn those fingers sideways. I really have quite a bit of slack under there. And the reason for that is as I'm slowly pulling my hand up, again very slowly because these lower leverage bits have fast action, that horse has lots of time before that curb chain gets tight. So he can see me coming from a long way away before we really make full contact with the bridle. And I want him to see that and hopefully yield however I'm asking him to yield, be it laterally or at the pole, before I really make contact with him. I tend to introduce these bits either after I've already ridden a horse in a snaffle. So I may have, wouldn't tend to be a Monday morning ride when they might be a little fresh, but a Tuesday ride, let's say, I may ride him 20 minutes in the snaffle, get him warmed up nice and soft, and then go put a transition bit and just kind of ease him around and really not ask much of him with the bridle at all. My favorite way to introduce these is to simply go on a trail ride with them. I'll go out in the pasture. I ride my horses out of the arena quite a bit, so that's a place they're very familiar with by that period. They are very relaxed and comfortable out there, and I'm not going to handle them much. What I do like about the pasture is that rather than me arbitrarily turning left in an arena somewhere, in the pasture I can go around a tree or between 2 clumps of brush. I can give him a reason for turning left. So he doesn't have, again, just some random arbitrary place to turn. I'm directing him to a point, and it helps make more sense to him. It also gives him visually a place to focus on, so he's not going to think so much about the different feel in his mouth. I also at that point have a horse pretty dadgum broke to my body and my legs, so I can help my hands out quite a bit. Again, I want to be very slow about how I move my hands. It is, in fact, quite proper to ride these transition bits with 2 hands. I am going to tend to do what I call remind and rewind when I go to these bits. I want to very slowly reprogress through all of the steps that I took him with the snaffle. For instance, I do lateral flexion long before I get to vertical flexion. So when I put this bit in his mouth, we're going to redo lateral flexion. Very slowly, very softly. We're going to start at a walk, we're going to progress to a trot, then to a lope. Then I'll worry a little bit more about vertical flexion. But I'm basically going to reconquer all of the mountains that I had to climb with the snaffle bit. Now it won't take me nearly as long this second time because it's just a reminder. But it allows him to get comfortable with the transition bit and to fully understand and expect what I'm going to be asking of him with this new bit. A couple other things I want to be conscious of. I call this a transition bit for a reason. And as with any transition in life or in any situation, there are going to be some rough patches. There's going to be some regression. There's going to be some uncomfortable moments. You need to understand that from the beginning. I find it a very grievous error and disservice to your horse to ride him twice in this feel like you didn't have 2 good rides, and so he must not be ready for it, and then you quit. When I'm going to move up to this bit, I'm going to commit a month to that horse to stay in this transition bit, and that's not a month in chronological time. That's a month worth of riding. So for me, that's 4 or 5 rides a week. We're talking 20, 22 rides. Might take you a lot longer to get 20 or 22 rides on your horse, but you need to give him that much time to get acclimated to and understand what this bit is about, or what these bits are about. I also don't change mouthpieces quite a bit. I would do it gradually through the transition stage. They might ride with 2 or 3 different bits. The final one would be that little correction mouthpiece that we showed a second ago. But I'm not going to change that in the first week. I liken a bit to like a pair of underwear. It's a pretty intimate thing. So don't go changing boxers and briefs. Just stay the course. Again, transition. You're going to have some uncomfortable moments. You're going to have some things that don't feel real good. Work your way through it, and it'll be fine on the other end. You will never remember in 2 years down the road, when your horse is full up in the bridle, that you took an extra 2 weeks in the transition stage to let him really be comfortable. It's absolutely worth it. You'd never, ever, ever get a second chance to do that transition period for the first time again. So make sure you get it right the first time. Again, those trail rides, that's a very relaxed ride, very easy. I'm not asking a lot. I'm not expecting a lot. Okay? Give them a chance, and they'll surprise you. They'll come right on up. As I had said before, the transition stage is not only a transition to leverage, but it's going to generally be a transition to ports and things like that as well. So even if I were moving from this snaffle mouth, and now my horse has a pretty good idea of what leverage is about, when I put the port in there, I'm going to again expect some regression. I'm going to give him some time to get used to carrying the port around without me pulling on him a lot. One thing I will say about that, one of the aspects of the bits that we talked about in the other video was the width of the mouthpiece. When you move to leverage bits, that really becomes more critical. With the snaffle bit, I had given you a good 1/2 inch on either side of play was not a problem. That's not true when you move to shanks. The bit needs to really fit the horse pretty well. You don't want a lot of extra slack. You certainly don't want it too tight. It really needs to kind of be right on in that sweet spot. You can get away with a little more slack in this broken mouthpiece, but when you move to the ported mouthpieces and things, it really becomes pretty important that that bit is fitting the horse's mouth, and you don't have slack side to side, especially with a port, because that port needs to stay centered. If he's got enough slack where he can shift that bit over an inch, that port could be irritating some teeth, or it's at least getting out of the concave part of the roof of his mouth, so it's going to cause him some discomfort. Really needs to be sitting square and centered. So with any of these transition bits, just like we talked about in the snaffle video, I think you need to ask yourself what happens when I pull up on the rein. So a bit like this, a little Argentine snaffle, it's going to have a fair bit of independent action. Okay? When I move up to a correction bit, that's not going to have much slack like this. When I pull on this rein, it's pretty well going to bring that into play, just like a curb. So that's even a little different feeling than what the horse is used to. So understand that there needs to be a pretty logical progression where we're not changing 10 things at a time. We're only changing a thing or two. If you don't understand what that bit is going to do when you put it in the horse's mouth, find someone who does. Not to be disparaging about feed store guys, but very frequently the guy at your local feed store behind the counter doesn't know beans about bits. I've heard more misinformation from those people than, sometimes I walk in and ask just to test him. I'll ask a trick question I certainly know the answer to, and if he comes up with something kooky about it that's not correct, well, I know that this guy doesn't know what the heck he's talking about, so I'm not going to ask anymore. But do find somebody that understands about bits and ask. If you don't understand what a bit does, I don't know why in the world you have any business riding with it. You don't know what you're looking for, how it's going to accomplish it. Why on earth would you take it? It just doesn't make any sense. And there are different reasons for using different bits. Billy Allen mouthpieces or barrel mouthpieces that have this centerpiece fused, square ports, lift and shoulders, you know, there really are mouthpieces that are designed to do certain things or help you in certain areas with your horse. I'm not negating that at all, but again, you need to understand it before you're going to have your hands on the line there. So this is one of my very favorite bridles. This is my little short shank correction bit. I absolutely love this bit. And like we had talked about a second ago, Curly, my personal horse that I do demos on, he rides bridleless. He's a pretty decent horse. If I'm going to go do a day's worth of cowboying, this is actually the bridle that I ride him in. Now, he's certainly capable of carrying way more bit than this. Like I say, you know, he's pretty finished. He works off of my body. I don't really have to use the bit much at all. So this is just a little more comfortable for him to carry all day. Also, if I'm cowboying and we get to the pins, I might have to let somebody borrow my horse, which I'm a little leery of a lot of times. So odds are the person riding him behind me doesn't have hands as good as I have. So there's only so much damage they can do to him with a milder bit. If I put him over there with a spade, well, they could wreak some havoc on the poor guy. You'll see how loose that curb chain is. See how low it hangs under the bit there. One of the things that I really find important in these short shank bits, we'll talk about a tom thumb in a second, but you see how this sweeps back. A bit that has a straight shank, when a horse is riding on the vertical, that shank is going to line up perfectly with his lips, and it tends to be an opportunity for them to start lipping the side of the bit, which is certainly a vice. I don't like seeing that at all. So these swept back shanks simply keep that from ever being a possibility. It's not, you know, it can't happen because the shank is not there for them to play with at all. I hate hearing a horse popping his lips the whole time I'm riding. So short shank correction bit. If I could have only 3 bits, they would be a snaffle, this, and then one of the finishing bits that I've got. This is absolutely an invaluable and infamous mouthpiece. The correction mouthpiece, I wish that they had named it anything but a correction. This is really a very mild mouthpiece. You can, of course, scare the heck out of one with it if you don't use it right or if you use it too severely, but that's really not what it's designed. I can two-hand a horse, ride them just like they're in a snaffle with this bridle, and I really like it because I can do that quite a bit without scaring them. I tend to find that with the plain snaffle mouth in a shank, if I ride a horse very long in this, let's say more than a month or two, I tend to find that they start to get a little dull to it, a little numb. So that's why I really like having the correction bit to go to, because that bit I can really continue to advance the horse's mouth without having to do things I would rather not have to do. I might have to punish a little bit in these snaffle mouths, broken mouths. At least that's how it has always worked for me. Now we'll talk a little bit about a couple other bits. One I had said a minute ago was a tom thumb. If I could eradicate any particular bit from the face of the earth, it probably would be a tom thumb. Tom thumbs. If you remember my criteria for a transition bit, they are loose shank, low leverage, mild mouth. Tom thumbs fit all of those criteria. That being said, I hate these things with a passion. This is actually my son's pony bridle. She tends to ride fairly well in it. Not saying that they never work well, but I'll show you a few things that I tend to not like about them. For one thing, they almost always have a very coarse ring set up in the middle of the broken mouth there. These rings tend to be bigger on them for some reason than the typical snaffle mouth. I don't know why, but that almost universally is true, at least in the poorer quality ones that I generally see. One other thing that I don't like is this particular union of mouthpiece and shank. These tend to get sloppy over time. See that? And they have a pretty good opportunity to really pinch a horse in the corners of the mouth right there. I never like this configuration of a mouthpiece to a shank, and by definition a tom thumb will always have it this way. One other thing that I don't like, as I just said, is the straightness. Now this is not a true tom thumb. A true tom thumb has an absolutely straight shank. The ring would be here rather than there. So this one has a little sweep to it, a little curvature. Again, I find this one acceptable. A true tom thumb, it's just really, it offers several pitfalls to form vices. And there are other, I'm not saying that this is a bridle I ride quite a bit. It's one of the few custom made bits that I've got. It's a loose shanked snaffle mouth, low leverage. I like it quite a bit. This is not at all a tom thumb. This one rides just fine. You see much more refined mouth on it. Still very loose shank, or curve. I'll show you this too. You'll notice on most of these bridles I tend to have a string and chain curve chain. That is because I like the string on these. The typical leather strap curve chain isn't as adjustable as I would tend to like them to be. These chains also they have a little bit more bite to them. So I can have a nice easy time of getting there, but if I have a horse that wants to get stupid, I can still bite him at the end a bit, which I ride a lot of problem horses, so that's a reality in my world, unfortunately. But just because there's a chain on there and it can have some bite doesn't mean I bite him all the time. Again, it's the hands that determine how severe. Okay, two other bits that I absolutely hate. This is one of the few bits that I have that has any gag action. This is called a junior cow horse. It's a good little transition bit. I like it, but it only has very mild gag action. So this piece, mouthpiece, sits in that ring. As I pull back, it can go up, what is that, a half an inch or so, 3/4 of an inch maybe. And so I can make him smile about that far before I've run out of gag action. A true sliding gag bit, there's no end to how far that bit can go up in the horse's mouth. You could about cut their head in half with the dadgum thing. Those bits are supposed to be for horses that get a little too low, drop a shoulder and things like that, so you can pick them up. I find that with a little bit of leg aid on the inside, I can very easily overcome that training problem without resulting to something that I consider to be pretty dadgum harsh. So I would absolutely eliminate sliding gags if it were left up to me, along with tom thumbs. The other bit or rig that I would eliminate would be the mechanical hackamores. They really don't have much of a place at all in good horsemanship as far as I'm concerned. I've seen several horses that have thing about a mechanical hackamore that you need to understand is that you're working on the same area that a bow saw does. You're on the nasal bone. Okay, you have now, bow saw for hundreds of years has been sufficient for people to control the horse. We took that sensitive area of the horse and added leverage to it. I've seen several horses that have had their nasal cavity crushed by a mechanical hackamore. If your horse is running away and you need that much juice to stop him, he needs training. He doesn't need some device like that. Mechanical hackamores are also, they are okay about stopping a horse going straight. They have no lateral to them whatsoever. They're very clunky and mechanically don't work at all well for lateral work, which is why I think I tend to see so many horses running away in them. If you've lost your lateral foundation, you've lost everything. So those are three things I would eliminate from the face of the earth if given the choice: tom thumb bits, sliding gag bits, mechanical hackamores. All right, this has been Daniel Dauphin with Dauphin Horsemanship. Thanks and have a great day.